For analysis on this, I'm joined by Chris Gunnis, who is a former UNRWA spokesperson. Chris, great to have you here with us on TRT World. You heard our correspondent Ashraf Shannon say that this is basically a drop in the ocean. Tell me, what do you make of Israel easing the blockade?
It is far too little and it is far too late. Let us not forget that between March and May, there was a total blockade. Nothing went in to Gaza. And then when eventually that was eased, just a trickle, a drop in the ocean, as the UN described it. So what we need now is not airdrops. Airdrops are undignified. They're unsafe. As your correspondent says, people get killed and they're extremely inefficient and uncost effective. We have miles of trucks waiting at the land crossings to go into Gaza. We need the Israelis to allow that to go in 24/7. We need to flood UNRWA, to flood Gaza with aid. And to be very clear, it is only UNRWA that can provide the backbone of the humanitarian response. As the Secretary General himself, Antonio Guterres, has said, UNRWA has the warehouses, UNRWA has the food distribution centers, UNRWA has the vehicles, UNRWA has the staff. Now, although it is the backbone, it's a very, very damaged backbone because so many of UNRWA facilities have been bombed, destroyed, damaged by the Israelis, and over 300 UNRWA staff members have been killed. So we need to open up all the road crossings, all the land crossings, and led by UNRWA, the United Nations needs to be allowed to operate. It can be done, it will be difficult, but ironically, only the UN that Israel has demonized and the UN led by UNRWA that the Israelis have tried to discredit, only those people, the UN agencies, the United Nations, can stop this huge global embarrassment for Israel. And that's why Israel needs to stop these restrictions on the UN.
And Chris, upon looking at the events that have unfolded over the past few hours, I think it's fair to say that international pressure does work on Israel because it's due to the international pressure Israel has eased its blockade. But my question is, how much more international pressure is required for Israel to completely lift the blockade?
Well, I don't buy into this notion that international pressure has been effective. Effective at what? Allowing over 150 people to starve to death, allowing the complete destruction of the Gaza Strip. It's all too little too late. I have to be honest and say that as far as I'm concerned, men like Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, he is the Neville Chamberlain of this century. He is appeasing Netanyahu and the criminals that are in charge, literally the accused criminals who are in charge of Israel in the Israeli cabinet at the moment. So pressure needs to be far, far more effectively complied. The International Court of Justice has made it clear in its advisory opinion on the illegality of the occupation that there has to be a total blockade of Israel, economic, military, diplomatic, academic, financial, blockade of all sorts. That is the obligation on UN member states to make sure that international law is actually implemented and that the international rule of law is something which isn't just something they pay lip service to, but it's something that requires action. And that action means sanctioning and blockading Israel. It's an obligation now on UN member states. There's been some pressure, but nothing like enough.
And Chris, we know from past instances that Israel has conveniently sidelined international law, United Nations Security Council resolutions. I want to ask you something. As a former UN worker, as a former aid worker, what do you make of Israel so conveniently sidelining international law and the way Tel Aviv has been treating the notion of law in general?
Let me tell you, I was the UN spokesman during the Srebrenica massacre in the Balkans in 1995. And at the time, we saw Milosevic, the Yugoslav strongman, the Bosnian Serbs just do exactly what Netanyahu is doing now, committing wholesale violations. There was starvation, there were concentration camps set up. But all these years later, when the tide of history turned, when the Serbians wanted to enter the EU, the EU turned around and said, you'll have to deliver Milosevic and the war criminals. So what I say is we need to send out a powerful signal that there will be accountability for this, that Netanyahu will and must be handed over for international justice. There's even an article in today's Haaretz, the liberal so-called Israeli newspaper, which is calling for Netanyahu to be handed over. Because make no mistake, if we don't act now, a signal will be sent to all future Netanyahu's, people who are using starvation as a weapon of war. The signal will be sent to them unless we do something to hold Netanyahu accountable. The signal will be sent to them. They can also feel free to use starvation as a weapon of war. The world cannot afford to go down that route. We need to see Netanyahu, we need to see him being held fully accountable. There are arrest warrants out for him from the ICC, and we need all 123 members of the Rome Statute, those who are members of the court, to implement that arrest warrant. He must be held accountable, because if there's a lack of accountability, the signal will be served that this kind of use of starvation as a weapon of war is something the world will tolerate. We need to act robustly, and that means governments taking effective political action.
Well said, Chris Gunness. Thanks very much for joining me here on TRT World. Really appreciate
My
you
pleasure.
taking out the time.